But now we have Tracy Kinden from Revolve Waste, and Tracy will bring this kind of more like European understanding about textile waste. So what happens in the European level, and also a little bit talk about the future. So please, Tracy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me today. It's humbling, I guess is the right word, to be alongside of so many good and amazing developments. So my name is Tracy Kinden. I have spent the last 8 years in what we now call circular textiles. I live and I work in the Netherlands, and I call myself a nerd mostly because I am pretty obsessed with what we talk about as textile waste. My specialty is in the textile resources that leak out of the system. So that waste flow, the recycling technologies that can recycle them, and the different steps needed, the different types of companies and types of operations needed to keep those wasted materials or put those wasted materials back in the system, keep them in the system. Typically, I'm a consultant. Typically, I work for recycling technologies or brands and retailers, sometimes the secondhand industry. And now where I found most of the work coming for me is within industry consortia. Slide, please. Oh, am I operating my own slides? Sorry about this. Give me just a moment. Ah, yes. Okay. I did not realize. Okay. Woo. So my company is Revolve. That's basically how I find myself in different consortia and these sorts of things. And I'm working on 2 major work streams at the moment. Revolve is a data insights and essentially connections company, and we work across this waste to recycling landscape. And while that's not all of circularity, it's quite an important part and where we tend to focus. In the new cotton project, which if you don't know, that is a demonstration project to go beyond cotton, to really demonstrate a circular model for commercial garment production. It's centered around the infinited fiber technology, so local Finnish heroes, and we're taking post-consumer materials for recycling, pre-processing it into feedstock, recycling it through their process, making it into new products and putting those on the market. My role on that project is actually quite small. I'm working on documenting with the other partners the available materials, the processes they go through from waste into ready for recycling, what we call feedstock. Yeah, so I'm working with them to do that specifically. And then the next project that I'm working on now, this is something that I'm in the lead with, and that's the Text Road. And the Text Road is a digital infrastructure for circular textiles. And our mission is to define the future of the industry by enabling effective policy so that circular textiles can scale. And right now we're working within the Accelerate Estonia program to define data and metrics for policy, for business, and to be able to recycle textiles, collect and report key data, and work in partnership with academia to do this. So essentially standing up that first version of a circular a digital infrastructure for circular textiles, and doing that across the triple helix. So what I wanted to share with you today was a little bit of insight and information into the different types of waste flows. We hear about textile waste, but it's actually not that simple. There are layers there. So I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk through the different types of materials available to drop back into the front of the supply chain. And the first one is post-industrial. And post-industrial typically looks like rolled goods. It looks like yarn on cones. Sometimes it's cutting scraps, sometimes it's yarn scraps. But for the most part, this is homogeneous material or very, very similar. And Pure Waste can speak to this for sure. There's a lot of these materials that have an end market. There are some that don't, but there are a lot that do. And they easily make their way into those end markets if they meet specification, such as high percentage or pure cotton content. So that's the post-industrial material. Then there's what we call, well, what I call pre-consumer. And pre-consumer, some people also call what I mentioned as post-industrial pre-consumer, but pre-consumer in the context that we use it is the stuff that's a finished product, but that either doesn't ever make it to the market or it gets returned. So it's product returns and unsold items. This waste stream is somewhat homogeneous, so it's somewhat mixed, it's somewhat homogeneous, but it tends to be large batches of very similar materials. And the reuse markets for this stuff are pretty strong, with a few exceptions. And the reason things may not move into these reuse markets is because the owner, typically the brand of the retailer, doesn't allow it. So in that case, it would drop into a recycling channel and fit into the conversation that we're having today. But pre-consumer is sort of this hybrid, post-industrial, post-consumer stream. And then there's, of course, post-consumer, and that's what we hear about a lot. Post-consumer comes from a couple of different sources, and it was illustrated with the Rester Lomasum LSJH example quite well. My Finnish is not existent, so excuse me for that. You can group it into two different things. So from the commercial side, you're looking at things like hotel linens, uniforms, and you see these hotel linens on the left, uniforms in the center. They're, again, fairly large batches or fairly homogeneous batches of a higher volume of material. And with these commercial streams, reuse quite often isn't possible, and that's for a variety of reasons. Some of it is security. So for example, you wouldn't necessarily want police uniforms. The reuse market could be a little risky there. So quite often these commercial sources of waste materials could find their way into a recycling process if they meet the spec of those input materials. So fairly homogeneous, fairly high volumes, and that's in contrast to the stuff that comes out of the households from the post-consumer streams. The household sources are basically a hot mess. They are highly blended materials, even in an individual product. They're often many different types of textiles layered together, and all of those variations are then mixed in one big batch. Quite often also they come with things like garbage in them. So post-consumer from household sources are very difficult to recycle, and I have a lot of respect for the companies that do it successfully. The other important thing to know about the household sources is that reuse is absolutely required to make the business case for sorting post-consumer from households work as a recycling feedstock. To say that differently, if you want to recycle textiles that come from people's homes into new textiles, the requirement is that the reuse fraction is sorted and resold into the reuse market, because otherwise the way that the sorting companies work today, they can't actually make enough money on the recycling sorting to make that business case work. So there's some work to be done there, and certainly LSJH is doing good work there along with others. So that's the three different varieties of materials that are out there. And what I have for you next, if I can get this slide to come up, here we go, is just a little bit of a look at how this breaks down, and from feedstock and inputs for recycling and a recovery cost. And the reason I'm going into this is because we talk about textile recycling like it's one big thing and technology will solve it all, but there are all of these little nuances that come into play that are important to consider when we're talking about things like making Finland the recycling hub that it's destined to be. So in the reuse column, we'll ignore that, but you can see the items that typically get reused. In the recycle column, you see what most frequently goes to recycling. You'll notice that I have skipped anything mentioning recycling on the unsold products from pre-consumer. That's a personal and I would say a revolved position. Those items should always go to reuse first. Certainly they go into recycling channels, but that's why there's nothing listed there. From the pre-consumer, post-consumer perspective, we'll leave the post-industrial to the side for the moment. You can see illustrated what I've mentioned before. Essentially, when post-consumer is coming from households, it's very difficult to process from waste into feedstock, and that means it has a really high recovery cost. Commercial post-consumer has maybe a medium recovery costs. And again, these things are stated simply to make a point. medium level of difficulty to pre-process it because the sorting required is not so stringent, and the recovery cost that comes along with that is a little bit lower than post-consumer from households. And that's, as we're looking to the future, these are important pieces of the business case in total. But post-consumer is really what's held up as the hope. And new business models, things like increasing collection and technology development are the things that that are really the buzzwords and what's becoming a big part of the conversation. Excuse me, these slides are not moving well for me. Yeah, here we go. We talk about post-consumer, we market post-consumer. When we talk about circular, this is what comes to people's minds. And so the important thing here to know is that we're still really figuring out the business case for the post-consumer side, and we actually need the post-industrial, the pre-consumer, and the commercial side of post-consumer in the waste stream or in the feedstock stream to be able to make the business case work, most likely. And that's because there are many different actors, and typically, not always, but typically post-consumer textiles are one group of companies that handles those. Post-industrial textiles, a different group of companies that handles those. And the pre-consumer textiles, kind of depends. Sometimes folks, sometimes it's the post-industrial folks, and sometimes they stand on their own. So it's very fragmented in that way. And it's also very fragmented in terms of many, many small holders. A lot of companies that work in small volumes that are scattered all over. So it's very hard to aggregate materials for recycling. It takes a lot of work to do. Post-consumer textiles, as I said before, also monstrous materials, really blended, really mixed up, and just quite difficult to actually get into a format that's compatible for most recycling technologies. Chemical recycling technologies are what's often held up as the thing to deal with post-consumer, but chemical recycling technologies typically have a narrower input specification. And so because post-consumer textiles are a mess, it is more difficult also, just because there are fewer materials, fewer products that are compatible. So we've got some work to do in terms of moving the how things are made and moving the input specifications on those recycling technologies to really make it work as well.
Tracy, I operate your slides, so you can just tell me when I need to click.
Thank you very much. So. I saw that switch over. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Of course, the one that can't handle my own slides today. Yeah. So a lot of work to be done there. I think a thing that I stated before that I will reiterate here is that the business case. How to say that well. The business case for creating recycling feedstocks from post-consumer from households absolutely requires the reuse fraction. Sorting for reuse still has to be done manually. The tech is developing, but it takes time. So it's labor intensive. So if you look across the landscape of opportunity around textile recycling, next slide, please. We really do need to think in the context of hubs. What you see here is an illustration of where the Eurotex hubs are supposed to land, where they're where Eurotex has drawn dots on the map and started placing hubs there. And what we really need to be able to get these hubs up and moving, what the promise here is that hubs can actually help address the economic situation that's a challenge for recycling post-consumer textiles. And that's because they align stakeholders to tackle a relevant problem that impacts them directly. It's grouping specific areas to be able to deal with things together. Post-consumer textiles are a hot topic because they're a legitimate waste problem, and it's easy to vilify fast fashion and consumption. And EU member states, as well as the European Union in general, are starting to wake up, and they're starting to push for policy. And so as we call for more post-consumer to be collected and recycled, we have to understand that reuse subsidizes, but reuse markets can't absorb a drastic increase in the collection of post-consumer textiles because there's less reusable stuff over time. More and more, there's less reusable in the amount that's collected. There's a low quality and a high volume. So if we start to increase the collection of post-consumer without addressing the economics, then we're going to have a problem. We need to have end markets in place that are broad, including reuse, but also recycling. We need to have the right technology, and we need to address, as I said before, design for recycling and design for longevity and reuse. So if we're looking at this in the context of the rehubs, what they allow us to do, and whether it's these specific rehubs that have been called out, or there's a slight shift in geography, what hubs allow us to do is focus the logistics. Logistics are also a big cost in the circularity equation. So focusing on a region can help focus the logistics. Post-consumer textiles is also where the people are, quite logically. So there are some parallels to the municipal solid waste challenges that are being looked at in the larger circular economy context. Things like hauling, things like how are municipalities handling their contracts, the public procurement side. One of the benefits of working in hubs is that different regions can learn from each other and start to focus and direct materials toward the same place, and they can start to do that, the contracting and things similarly. Moving materials also gets a strategic, environmental, and an economic focus. So you're looking at diverting waste from landfill, but you might also be looking, if you're thinking beyond just Finland and thinking to neighboring countries, economic value and benefit from moving what was once waste but could be classified as a raw material across borders because you've started to open those things up by working in hubs. So a lot of good potential benefits to really working together, both in Finland but across the Nordics, Baltics, or even beyond. Solving problems with your neighbors for mutual benefit is always a good thing. Next slide, please. So what we've heard already today is that there's just so much good stuff happening here. One of the things that I'm very excited about with the TextRoad work we're doing is we're working across Finland and Estonia. As I said, it's an initiative that is supported at this point from the Accelerate Estonia program. But as we look across the Finland-Estonia partnership and across the Nordics, Baltics, there's so much opportunity. Just creating a digital infrastructure and sharing information, sharing the data so that finished solutions can scale up and start to pull in materials from across the region, but also potentially find other processing partners in other regions. So it's not just Finland that does it all, but really you're creating a strong hub that brings everybody together. And last slide. So yes, so to wrap it up, there's a lot of value and a lot of benefit and so much that we can do. And one of the big pieces of that, as I said before, is lowering of barriers for materials crossing borders. Maybe I didn't say that, but it was certainly in my mind. If you can move those materials across the border, you start to solve a lot of problems. The other things that we need to think about are really looking for solutions for the low value or difficult to recycle materials. This is things like developing recycling technologies to have broader input material specs. So it was in the first presentation, I believe, looking at not just pure cotton waste, but also cotton polyblends and a little bit of elastane involved. Those broadening of input specifications are very, very important. But we also need to flip that around and look at design and look at fiber usage and make sure things aren't coming into those products that are making them more difficult to recycle. So working both of those ends together at the same time. Policy is also quite a big deal. So EPR is becoming more and more of an important thing. And the more I look into what EPR is and what it does, the more I see opportunities to help change the economic equation as well. Whether it's EPR or another, perhaps VAT focused policy, or something else, there are policy instruments that can change that economic situation, and they're really important to look at as well. From a design perspective, what we really encourage brands and retailers to do is limit their unnecessary blends, limit how many different materials they're combining, and limit the amount of treatments that come through that are applied to products. Because if it doesn't have a reason to be there, that's really, really important, that's not absolutely performance imperative, then we need to be questioning why these things are applied to products. It just makes them harder to become circular. Circular business models are another important piece. This is something that's been talked about quite a lot on the brand retailer side, but also it's important to think about circular business models as longer and stronger relationships across value chains. Really important stuff to do. And then breaking down the data silos. I mean, just critically important stuff. If we're sharing more information in a safe way, but sharing more information and using the same version of truth, we're just going to get a lot further, a lot faster. And so moving forward in my own work with the projects mentioned, we're working to align policymakers, the private sector and academia to really accomplish that goal of that same version of truth. And you can hit that last slide, please. So I hope that was interesting and informative. You're most welcome to reach out. Please do follow any or all three of those organizations on LinkedIn and Twitter and all of the digital places. And I look forward to seeing you all again.
Thank you, Tracy. This was a good ending for this presentation. And now I wish that all panelists will open their cameras so that we can see you and we can start the panel discussion. So actually this was really nice ending, Tracy, that you provided us with like a wider view for the what is happening in European level. And we were thinking that that we can start the discussion about this. Well, we would like to see that now we had a nice presentation, what is happening currently, where we are right now, and leave it like open in the future. But we were thinking that how to make this reality. So now we already know that there are a lot of opportunities, but of course there's also some obstacles that we know already. And Tracy actually quietly pointed out a few of them, for example. So if you think about the year 2035, what kind of reality then there will be in this textile and fashion sector, how we actually are able to circulate stuff, what is the understanding with the circular economy then and what kind of steps we need to take to make this reality. So I wish that we can start the panel discussion with this in mind, that we have a little bit like futures view, that what will happen and how to make this reality in the future. And we can start the discussion with Outi and Hannes. So you can start thinking about the mechanical recycling. And I think that was quite nice. We already had some points that what to do locally, what to do globally, why in Finland, what to do in Finland. So what is the perspective if you think about your own field and the mechanical recycle? So what is worthwhile to do in Finland? And actually Hannes already touched the spinning plant, for example, which we are missing from Finland, for example. So do you want to start, Hannes and Outi?
Yes, please. Who wants to start, me or Outi? Okay. I think it's we have like really nice future plans, both we and I think all of us, regarding like recycled fibers, textile fibers for Finland in the future. As said, we've been thinking about that a spinning mill would be good, because especially when we have Rester and we have like this chemical recycling new innovations and processes going on, we have a lot of like places in Finland where we could also start to produce these fibers eventually. So it could be nice to have a spinning mill as well. We don't have to have the whole production, meaning that we have to produce fabrics necessarily in Finland. And as said, we don't have to try to do everything by ourselves in Finland. But this could be a new nice infrastructure to build up in Finland regarding like recycled fibers.
If I may continue to that, I think that Hannes is directly on the right track, because if we think about the textile production, like in general, that is something that is needed in order to make this coming back textile to textile. So this way, I think the spinning is kind of the most crucial part to be solved. And I truly hope that this is going to be real very shortly. Otherwise, I think that we are facing, at the moment, kind of the challenges exactly on the fact that we don't know, or we don't have yet the value chains for all the recycled streams, like for all the different qualities of textile, because there are combinations, there are special features in many of them. And so this is also needed to be solved fast, so that we will get all the material in usage. And on the other hand, it means that if we find an interesting value chain that would be using part of the recycled raw material which we are getting, the other question is then that will we have it enough, exactly this kind of material. So we know that we have a lot of polyester cotton mixes, but still, do we need to have a color sorted materials, or can we do something about this, that we don't really mind so much about the color issues, for example, when we have recycled materials? These are all the issues we have to face and kind of try to solve one by one. But what comes to this scale or this vision of next 10 years or so, I think that we are in a great run at the moment, and Finland has been proven to be innovative and brave enough to take these steps, or Finnish companies or people. So I think we are we are going to be in very good shape what comes to circular solutions in general.